I'm Captain Thomas Fisher, and I am the commanding officer of Starfleet's HR Command, which is headquartered here on Starbase 1. I've held this post for coming up on 3 years, and I've served in HR for a total of 22 years. What is HR? Basically, here at HR Command, we offer support to members of Starfleet, officers, and enlisted personnel in the areas of career and workplace management. We assist personnel in pursuing career paths within the service. We settle disputes. We offer guidance during the enlistment and discharge processes. We provide guidelines to commanding officers. It's a fairly broad operational area. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry. HR stands for Humanoid Resources. And because I can guess what your next question will be, non-humanoid Starfleet personnel are entitled to the same supports we offer, but they have their own department. That would be the beings with atypical morphologies resources, or BAMOR Command. Its headquarters is also here at Starbase 1, 2 levels down on the other side of the dockyard. Not a very busy office. Starfleet is mostly humanoids. In fact, I think more than half the non-humanoids in Starfleet are stationed here at BAMOR. I've actually gotten to be real good friends with the CO over there, Commander Thickweck. She's a Vecumorg. They're kind of like talking squids, only they live in trees. Don't ask me how that happened. I fell asleep during evolutionary astrobiology. It's nice we have it, though, you know. BAMOR. Most of the galaxy is still unexplored, so someday there might be more of a need. Maybe in the future, Starfleet will be a majority talking tree squids. In the meantime, the corridor outside their section is an excellent spot to sit and read, especially around lunchtime when the windows are facing Jupiter and, you know, nobody's ever around. What challenges does working at HR Command present? Well, it is challenging, first of all. Starfleet is an incredibly diverse service, and while we regard that diversity as a strength, that's one of our core principles, managing that diversity to ensure that everyone is treated with fairness and respect is a constant balancing act. I mean, why do you think I got these? Captain's rank isn't required for my position. My predecessor was a commander. Actually, all my predecessors were commanders. When my immediate predecessor, Commander Dakia Niaga, left, she got promoted to captain of the USS Goodland. She recommended me to replace her, but she told me to demand a bump up to captain as a condition of accepting the assignment because of how stressful the job is. So I did. And they went for it. Youngest staff captain in Starfleet history. It is stressful, yes. It's more stressful for the junior officers who are actually doing the essential work of the department, providing guidance, handling complaints. My role is more big picture stuff, accepting suggestions from my HR officers who have identified deficiencies in our guidelines that need to be corrected, and then it's my job to take that to my staff so they can come up with new guidelines and procedures, which I then approve. It's a lot of meetings and a lot of paperwork. The amount of paperwork alone justifies the rank bump. Like, I know starship captains are out there exploring the universe and discovering new life forms and having to face potentially deadly situations, but how many of them have had to generate consensual relationship agreements for a service with members from nearly 100 different species? And I mean, I don't even have a self-destruct button. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Starfleet regulations don't prohibit service members stationed on the same ship or at the same outpost from having relationships with each other. If asked, we do discourage officers from dating someone under their direct command, but that doesn't matter because we're hardly ever asked. If an officer and someone under that officer's direct command do enter into an ongoing relationship, regulations require that all parties involved in the relationship complete and sign a consensual relationship agreement, disclosing the relationship to us here at HR Command. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? That's your Earth-centric bias talking. I had the same problem. We know what we mean when we say relationship or romantic relationship or dating, but not all cultures understand those terms the same way we do. Corvalurians consider a romantic relationship serious after 2 dates. Mazartians don't consider a relationship serious until after you've had sex in front of an uninvolved third party. Bergoloids draw no distinction in terms of intimacy between prolonged eye contact and sexual intercourse. It can get complicated, is what I'm saying. And service members trying to navigate that while respecting each other, respecting the chain of command, and continuing to pursue their Starfleet careers need someone to inform them and protect them and guide them, and that's where I come in. Well, that's where people who work under my command come in. Thank Christ I don't have to do that anymore. Oh, can you cut that last bit out? If you're uncomfortable talking about it while we're recording, we can discuss it later. Maybe I can owe you a favor. So where was I? Oh, right. Cultural diversity within the service is a challenge from an HR perspective. And if you think it sounds daunting keeping the guidelines up to date regarding what constitutes a relationship that should be disclosed depending on the cultural backgrounds of the individuals involved, just wait until I tell you about conflict resolution. So, let me share a quick story. A few years ago, on a starship, let's say it was the USS Colorado. It wasn't, but let's just say. There was an officer, Lieutenant Commander Smith, not her real name. And she had a complaint filed against her by another officer on her ship, Ensign Jones, not his real name either. This is a true story. I'm just protecting everyone's anonymity. Okay, so Commander Smith has a complaint filed against her by Ensign Jones. She's confused. She doesn't remember the two of them ever having any sort of problem. In fact, she doesn't remember them having more than a handful of token interactions at all. Commander Smith works in the engineering department, and Ensign Jones is a science officer assigned to one of the astrophysics labs. They barely know each other. Commander Smith is wondering what this complaint could possibly be about. Come to find out, one of those token interactions Commander Smith had with Ensign Jones was shortly after Jones had received word that his father had passed away. Commander Smith heard about it, and when she happened to run into Ensign Jones when they were both in the ship's mess, Commander Smith took a moment to offer her condolences. Nice gesture, right? Except, here's the problem. Ensign Jones is biologically human, but he was adopted and raised by a Kragmatite polycule, so he's culturally Kragmatite. Eastern Kragmatite, to be exact. The Kragmatites aren't as culturally homogenous as most other spacefaring species. And in Eastern Kragmatite culture, you don't offer condolences on the death of someone who was involved in a polycule unless you intend to present yourself to take the place of the deceased in the polycule. So what Commander Smith meant as a gesture of kindness, Ensign Jones took as Commander Smith implicitly asking, hey, are your parents seeing anybody? Now, it doesn't seem like such a nice gesture, does it? Fortunately, after the complaint was filed, the first officer of the Colorado, following our established HR procedures, was able to resolve the conflict, and they both continued to serve amicably together. See, these interpersonal waters can be treacherous, but you can navigate them. As a matter of fact, I met my wife in circumstances that were similar to that story. My mother had died. It was her memorial service, and the woman who is now my wife came up to me and said, I'm very sorry about your mom. Is your dad here with anybody? And as it happens, he wasn't. They talked, hit it off, dated for several years. Dad died. She and I got together, married the following year, and here we are. So sometimes crossing those social boundaries isn't such a big deal. Of course, in our case, it helps that we're both human and both from Appalachia as well, so we really don't give a shit. Can I prevail upon you to cut that bit out as well? You don't have to decide now. Later on, we'll have a conversation. Anyway, sorry, I'm not trying to talk over you, but I reminded myself of something else just now. I said that it was the first officer on the ship that resolved the HR dispute. That's because most starships don't actually have a dedicated HR representative on board. That's a workforce issue. We aren't exactly the most glamorous department in the service, and recruitment is always a challenge. There are HR reps out in the field, as it were, but I'm forced to deploy those strategically. Ordinarily, it's not a major problem because we conduct regular training sessions for senior officers. At the very least, every starship has a captain and a first officer trained in the basics of HR, and ideally every department head as well, though that's not always the case. Usually there's no problem, and if there is, one of us is always only a subspace message away. But because most starships don't have dedicated, independent, outside the main command structure HR reps, we do sometimes have an issue, especially aboard starships on long-term deployments, because what happens is captains and first officers tend to become friends, or they're friends already. Again, not usually a problem, but what if there's no HR rep on the ship, and only the captain and the first officer have been trained in HR, and the captain sexually harasses a member of the crew? I know the company line is humanity has evolved, we've overcome our baser instincts, and in many ways we have. HR is a good example of that. In fact, up through the 21st century, private companies had HR departments that superficially appeared to support and protect the employees when in reality they almost always acted to protect the interests of the company. And people back then were still forced to trade their labor for the basic necessities of life. Can you imagine trying to survive under those conditions? Of course, I suppose I'd have been all right, assuming I was still working in HR. Apparently, it was a well-paying job. But all that being said, let me assure you, the situation I just described, a starship captain harassing someone on the crew, it happens. Sometimes the captain isn't actually at fault. Space is weird. Stuff happens. A captain's personality could be altered by an alien virus. The captain could be replaced by a shapeshifter, or undergo a time travel related behavioral regression, or be taken over by a telepath. I'm probably missing one. These are all actual cases, by the way. But to the person being harassed, in that moment, it doesn't matter. What matters is the only person on that ship they can go to about that harassment is the first officer, the best friend of the captain who just harassed them. That's an unfair situation for that harassed crew member to be forced into in the first place, and it gets worse if the first officer isn't yet aware of the underlying issue that is causing the captain to behave this way, if there is an underlying issue. The first officer might be inclined to disbelieve the person reporting the abuse or discourage them from making a big deal about it, which is the wrong thing for that first officer to do, but it is also understandable, and that's why Starfleet has an HR command in the first place, to avoid conflicts of interest like that. And clearly that's an area where we need to do better, because join Starfleet to see the galaxy, but be warned that if your captain corners you in the ready room and makes a pass at you because they were infected by a neurologically coercive fungus on their last away mission, the person you need to report it to might be the captain's best friend, doesn't make a very good recruiting slogan. Know what I'm saying? Once again, I apologize. You look like you were about to ask me another question before I went off on that last tangent. Did you? Oh, I know who this is, and I think I know what it's about. It's a private call, if I can beg your pardon for just a minute. Yes. All right, well, let me stop you there. I apologize. I'm aware of the situation up to this point, so I don't need to recap. Just give me the update. What did he say? Give me his exact words. Oh, good Lord. And he said this to her in front of witnesses? In private. That's actually worse. He shouldn't have been alone with her under any circumstances. She's off duty now? All right. Tell her to remain in her quarters, and this afternoon I'm going to place her on leave. Make sure she understands that it's only temporary and it is in no way disciplinary. She's not being punished for anything. It's just to keep her away from him because I don't actually have unilateral authority to order him transferred. I need to kick that up the ladder, and her going on leave gives me time to do that without risk of exposing her to him any further. Right. Yes. Poor choice of words. Or actually the perfect choice of words if you think about it. All right. Hopefully by the time she returns to duty, this will all be sorted out. Okay? Thank you for the call. Okay. Bye-bye. We have such problems with admirals. I don't know what it is. Not all of them. My direct superior is an admiral, the chief of personnel, and they and I have never had the slightest problem. But we get so many cases. There's something about that rank that flips a switch in some people. They're exemplary officers their whole careers, and then they make admiral. And especially if they wind up deployed somewhere out on the frontier, away from direct supervision, it's like they think they can do whatever they want. You remember that scandal about 10 years ago during the Klingon War? Those guys got in trouble after the Battle of Feldspar 6 for making that video, where they had that Klingon POW tied to a chair, and they had his dagger, and they took turns holding the dagger at their crotch and thrusting it in his face. Cut this bit out. Thrusting it in his face like that. You remember that? How could you forget? The guys who actually did that and recorded it got off with a slap on the wrist because it came out that they'd been ordered to do it by an admiral who heard Starfleet had taken prisoners after Feldspar 6, and she thought it would be funny. And obviously, that falls beyond the purview of HR, but that represents the kind of thing we're dealing with. And this, I can't give you the details, obviously, but let me just state it hypothetically. Hypothetically, if you are an admiral, and you're placed in command of a fleet deployed to patrol the far edge of Federation territory in, I don't know, let's say Sector 345, hypothetically. And you get drunk at a St. Patrick's Day party and decide it's a good idea to invite one of the young ensigns on your staff into your private office so you can show her the tattoo of the old Starfleet motto that you got on your ass on either side of the crack, only you changed it so that on the left cheek it reads Ad Astra, and on the right cheek it reads Per Asperma, which doesn't make sense in multiple ways, but never mind, we're just talking hypothetically. If you do that and have an HR complaint filed against you as a result, do not make the excuse that you only did that because you were possessed by the disembodied soul of a dead Marsanite king who had an exhibitionist streak, especially when you have to know you'll be found out for being full of shit because you know there'll be an investigation and there's a very reliable test for Marsanite soul possession. It's a simple cheek swab and it can detect if a Marsanite soul has been present in your body anytime within the last 7 to 10 days. And you know this too because the scientist who invented the test just won the Nobel Prize for it last year and it was all over the news. But if you do any of that anyway, definitely don't summon that ensign back to your office this morning under the guise of wanting to apologize and say to her, by way of an apology, quote, I just want to assure you of my dedication to re-sperming our professional relationship. Hypothetically. That's all I'm saying. The saddest part of that, tattoo removal is so easy. They wave one of those dermal lasers over it, and I should know, I used to have a tattoo of my high school sweetheart's head right here on my left-hand titty. I had it removed following her death. After high school, she moved to the colony on Brilbrax 4, and when the Manalvagorian zealots attacked, she was decapitated. Seemed like bad taste at that point. So I had it taken off. like it was never there. Hair won't grow over that spot anymore, but you can't tell there was ever a tattoo. Can you cut that out? I'd prefer it if that didn't get around. Might make things awkward with my wife. She grows jealous at reminders of my past romances. We'll talk. We'll talk.